on your webpage. So at all levels around the world, there's just this push for citizen participation. So the Rio Conference on the Environment, the UNCED conference in Rio in 1992, stated that environmental issues are best handled with participation of all concerned at the relevant level. I think the relevant level is a really important qualifier there that you need to think about. So as well as the timing, we need to think about the relevant level and having sincere and genuine consultation process where people can have an input at the right level. So in terms of UN declarations which are about to be put into place, it's too late to come to ANU and ask a group of students what they think about it. It's not the right timing, it's not the right level. So we need to be conscious of that always. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is a key grouping of NGOs. So it's an interesting NGO and it's a network of NGOs. So increasingly there's these mega NGOs which are networks of NGOs forming, and it's one of the most important ones in terms of resource management. So if you're interested in working in this area, do have a look at their webpage. There's a lot of very good policy documents on that, and there's one that I particularly recommend called Beyond Fences, and I'll come back to that in terms of some ideas from some research I've done in Vietnam. So the ICN Caring for the Environment document talks about how local people are most likely to care for natural resources when they maintain control over both their natural resources and the development process, and in doing so are able to satisfy their needs. So if you're setting up a national park in a developing country and there's 100,000 people living in it, this is happening all the time, it's happening as we speak. There are different models on how you do that. The Yellowstone model of national parks, which has been so influential, has involved clearing people out of those parks who've long lived there, so in Yellowstone's case, Indigenous people, and then having a park free of people. So I would argue very strongly that makes absolutely no sense in most settings, if not all settings. You often have traditional societies with a long history of managing those resources who are dependent on those resources being pushed out. It's particularly happening at the moment in India in a lot of national parks, but it's also happening in places like Vietnam, where in some cases authorities are working with local communities and empowering them to manage those resources. In other areas, they're either denying their existence or forcibly removing people from those areas. So very, very different approaches in terms of involving people in the development process, involving people in the conservation process. So in 1985, the Vietnamese National Conservation Strategy really stresses this importance of engagement, and it's embodied in a lot of the legislation and a lot of the practice in countries such as Vietnam. So protected areas fail in their objectives unless the needs of local people are given serious attention at the design and planning stage. So you're setting up a national park, and if you don't talk to local people about where they recognise the boundaries are or what they see as important resources, that national park is likely to fail and not to work. So we need to have we need to be conscious of the various direct and indirect benefits that are made available to local people through the establishment of the managing of these reserves. So rather than excluding people from the conservation process, if you give them a say and they financially benefit from a resource being conserved, obviously they're going to be much more empowered in terms of protecting that resource. So these are some images from some work I've done with a PhD student in northern Vietnam. And you're driving in an area and you see a truck come out of the forest and they say, well, that's all illegal logging. You see timber being cut there, which is one log can be worth a year's income in terms of one person's livelihood. So huge pressure on these forests in terms of poor people who can make a living. Areas close to the Chinese or Laos borders, there's an easy way to get the wood across the border. In other cases, it's more openly just transported. So in terms of protecting these forests, there's obviously a key issue to involve local communities in managing those. So the challenge is to set up processes that involve the community to do that, which are effective and not exclude things. This is Ba Bay National Park in northern Vietnam, and it's taken with a powerful lens, but the top of these mountains are all being illegally cleared by slash and burn agriculturists, and they're growing corn up there. These people have lived in this area for 200 or 300 years, so they have a long association with that area. and they need to make an income. And when we went up and interviewed them, most people actually weren't aware they were in a national park, so they hadn't been involved in the process to know that was a national park. This is a community forestry project where a local community, with the assistance of United Nations Development Programme, has been given resources and ownership of that resource, and now are managing in a very sustainable way. So the difference is, in this case, has got a lot to do with both the participation of those people, but also the land tenure. So rather than being saying you have no control over that forest, they've actually been given a lease over that area and have some user rights, and therefore they have an interest in protecting that, and they're the ones stopping the illegal logging now. So it's not the government officials who are poorly paid and can't administer a whole area, it's local people engaged in protecting that resource. And often you see scenes such as this, people coming out of the forest with just little piles of firewood, which are quite valuable, and the issue is thinking of ways where this harvesting can be done in a sustainable way where local people benefit rather than outsiders. So small scale firewood collection, I would argue, is very different to deforestation and exporting logs internationally for timber companies. This is a place that one of my former students, Tukin, you can see in the front there, is involved with an area in central Vietnam where a community group has been given control of resources. 300 local farmers are involved in this area, and again, they're the ones putting up this check post here to stop illegal logging. So quite a different approach in terms of local community engagement and involvement in managing those resources. There's also been an interesting trend in donor organisations in terms of pushing the need for public participation. So as well as happening in Australia in terms of things such as Landcare, the Murray-Darling Basin Initiative, people such as the World Bank, organisations such as the World Bank, the United Nations Development Programme, and other major donors, increasingly saying public participation is a key in resource management projects, and we'll have that as one of the criteria if you're going for funding. And if you're interested in this area, I really strongly encourage you to do Jackie Shermer's excellent course that's taught in the break between the two semesters, where there's an intensive week in the participatory resource management course. She'll talk about things such as social forestry, farmer first, and a whole range of other strategies in terms of involving the community in conservation efforts. So increasingly people are talking about integrated conservation and development. You can't have development and excluding local people from the process of controlling their own resources. So I said I'd talk about the different meanings, and there's quite subtle differences if you think about it between these terms: public participation, public involvement, public consultation, public negotiation, community participation. So you need to think about these different terms and what they mean when people use them, and I would argue there's quite subtle differences in those, and the language is often very important. Likewise, in using the term community, we have to be much more critical than most people are. They talk about talking to the community, and you need to be conscious that there isn't a community out there. There's lots and lots of different communities, and each of you belong to a range of different communities. So if you're told by an employee to go consult the community, you should ask your boss, what do you actually mean? Ask him or her, which aspects of the community are we going to focus on? What is going to be our consultation strategy? What are the different strategies we're going to use to get to different people? So if you're trying to consult Indigenous people in Australia who don't, in many cases in remote communities, still don't have access to electricity and not often computers, having your consultation process nearly entirely web-based is likely not to work. And there have been consultation processes in the last 5 years in Australia based on that strategy for Indigenous people. So these kind of things still happen where people don't think about the different constituencies of how people need to be consulted and how people want to be represented. So community can refer to an interest group, a lobby group, a pressure group, an industry association. So these are all examples of different community. Can talk about, refer to, an interest group can be a community of common concern. I think I've already mentioned in this class, one of my favourite examples is the community of common concern, which is downstream from Albury. So everyone downstream of the water the sewage work at Albury,